Well, I think we have gone live. So first of all, welcome everybody. So glad you've been able to join us today. So what are we going to focus on today? We're going to be talking about how we can support female colleagues in the workplace that are suffering with menopause conditions. And to help me do that, I've invited Melanie Franklin along today. Melanie is the founder of the Continuous Change community, but she's also a real authority when it comes to behavioural change within the workplace. Mel, thank you so much for being part of this webinar today. It means a huge amount to me on a personal level, but I also know it means a lot to a lot of people within ILX and hopefully to our listeners today. So
I'm really looking forward to this, so I'll let you get on.
Me too, me too. So we're going to run this session in two parts. I'm going to start by sharing my own personal menopause journey. Then I'm going to hand you over to Mel, and she's going to be talking about how we can ensure a menopause policy moves from a document to a change in perception, attitudes, and behaviours. But before I embark on my own personal story, I just need to go through a bit of housekeeping with you, and it won't take long, and then we can get going. First of all, I mean, we positively encourage questions. I'd love to run this as an interactive session, but unfortunately, we've only got 1 hour. And if we keep it fully interactive, we might find ourselves here at 4 o'clock this afternoon. So if you can keep your questions to the end, but please do submit your questions as we go through the session. And Gemma will read them out at the end, and we'll obviously answer as many as we possibly can. If you haven't already done so, please put yourself on mute so there's no background disturbance. And if you're not already following us on any of our social media platforms, please do. We're always sharing a wealth of information, whether or not it's a blog on the menopause, whether or not it's a podcast on diversity and inclusion in the workplace, or whether or not it's some information on how to take your Prince 2 accreditation. There's a wide information that we're sharing with our followers. And then last but not least, when we end the session, a pop-up screen will appear for you to give some feedback, and we really do appreciate any feedback because it enables us to continue to improve these sessions that we deliver to our community of learners. Okay, so I think that's it for housekeeping. Don't know if I mentioned or not, but I'm Sally, and I'm the sales director here at the ILX. And why do I want to share my own personal story? I think there's a couple of main reasons. The first one is I don't want any other woman to suffer in silence for as long as I did, and for it to really impact your role within the workplace. And it's probably only very recently that I have been open about what I have gone through. And to be quite honest, they have been really debilitating symptoms that have affected me. And it really did affect me in my role for a long time. And it was a very dark time where I felt unsupported. At the time, I thought I was losing my mind and I barely recognized myself. So, first and foremost, I don't want anyone to go through that. So, if I give you the confidence today to go and do something different, to go and take some ownership of your menopause journey, I'd be very happy with that result. I think, secondly, I want to play my part in educating people. So it doesn't matter whether or not you are going through, horrific menopause symptoms, whether or not you haven't entered into the menopause, or whether or not you will never experience the menopause. It doesn't matter. I want to be able to educate people so that women that are going through this do feel they have the support in the workplace and they don't feel a failure, because quite frankly, feeling a failure is not a good place to be, and it absolutely doesn't need to happen if there is greater awareness and greater support. So I think they're the main reasons why I want to share my story today. Okay, so where should we start? Probably at the beginning, which was probably about 2.5, 3 years ago when I started to experience these symptoms. So just to tell you a little bit about my role, I'm the sales director. I'm responsible for 22 people in the team, 8 males and 14 females. Actually, 60% of females represent the overall workforce here at the ILX group. I'm part of the senior leadership team. I'm really proud to be part of that team, along with 4 other male colleagues. and I report directly into our MD, Russell. And I'd say that my role really hasn't changed hugely over the last 6.5 years. But about 2.5, 3 years ago, I started to, well, I think I started to be aware that I just wasn't sort of able to handle certain demands of the job that I had previously previously hadn't phased me. And I would say that it started with me waking up on most mornings, worrying about work things, worrying about them and thinking about probably the worst outcomes rather than the best outcomes, which is actually really unlike me because I'm actually a really positive person. And I couldn't really put my finger on why I was feeling like this, but I just hoped that it would go away as quickly as it had come. But it didn't. And as it continued, my anxiety grew. I think the negativity grew as well. And then these symptoms started to manifest themselves into physical symptoms. So I then started to get the night sweats. Not very pleasant. You go to bed and you wake up literally drenched head to toe in perspiration. That doesn't help with your sleep. So I was then becoming sleep deprived. And over time, I gradually lost my confidence. I lost my confidence. I'd never lost my passion, but I certainly lost my confidence. And I can remember one day going into a presentation because, I forgot to tell you, I also got the hot flushes in the day. And at one point, I was getting 10 hot flushes in a day. And I was about to do a big presentation. It was a really important presentation. And I could feel this wave of heat course through my body. I knew my head was bright red. I was, physically, you could see I was dripping with perspiration. That is not a good place to be in, especially when you're doing a presentation where you're meant to be at your peak performance. So, and then the brain fog. So the brain fog comes in. So you forget words. I remember introducing colleagues and actually forgetting what their names were. These are people that I'd worked with for years and years. I remember my decision making just wasn't as precise as it used to be, and losing my thread in conversations. It is a downward spiral. Anyway, after one particular bad night, that weekend I was seeing my group of girlfriends and we went out for a big walk and I blurted it all out. And a friend of mine turned around and she said, "Welcome to the menopause, Sal." I was like, "The menopause?" And I just didn't join up the dots. I had not associated all of this stuff that I was going through with the menopause. And I'm also really ashamed to say that I actually didn't think that I would suffer menopausal symptoms, because I'm bulletproof, or I thought I was bulletproof. I didn't think I would suffer these symptoms. And and I'm embarrassed to say, I thought maybe people made them out to be worse than they actually were. And I think this is because I never really spoke about it. My mum never spoke to me about it. It just wasn't a conversation that I spoke about. Anyway, after this walk with my friends, and actually discovering on that walk that 4 of my friends out of a group of 8 had also suffered these debilitating symptoms, I decided to do something about it. I'm 52, 50 then. I have a zest for life. I wasn't going to allow this to curtail my career. I love working for ILX, and I felt I had a lot more to do within the organisation. So I went and embarked on my own research. I started to listen to a lot of podcasts. I started to read a lot of articles. I started to follow a couple of menopause experts, Dr. Louise Newson and Dr. Naomi Potter. I followed their Instagram pages. And I decided after doing my research that I was going to go on HRT. That was my decision. I was going to go on to HRT and I was going to feel better in myself. So I booked myself an appointment with the GP. I asked specifically if a woman of a similar age, in hope that not only would she be able to give me her medical advice, but she would also be able to give me her personal perspective as well. I left that GP appointment with the GP saying, "Sally, I'm ashamed to say that you actually know more about the menopause than I do. And she said, and it actually has given me a kick up the bum to go and do more research. Now, that's a whole nother story, but there you go. So anyway, where am I now? I sleep, and that's wonderful because I've always been able to sleep on a washing line, but I sleep again. I have fewer hot flushes. In fact, I rarely have a hot flush. I feel more in control. I feel more confident. I have got my mojo back. I feel like Sally again. And it's been a real journey. It has been a journey, but I'm really proud of my journey because I have taken action. I've taken control, and I have done something about it. And I hope that it inspires someone out there in this audience to go and do something differently. I hope it inspires people that are working in organizations to drive change in that organization in terms of making menopause policies, moving from that policy to really sort of driving change towards people ladies that are potentially suffering these awful conditions. It shocks me to know that over 1 million women in the UK alone suffer menopause symptoms. And I hope that each and every one of us will do our bit to try and improve that statistic. I'd like to thank you for listening to my story, and I'm conscious of time. I'm sure that there will be opportunity to go through people's questions at the end of the webinar. But for now, I'm going to hand you over to Melanie, who's got lots of good stuff to share with us as well. So Melanie, thank you. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. One of the things that I want to reflect on to start with is that already Sally's made a difference to my life. First of all, I felt a bit embarrassed about coming onto this webinar because when Sally was sharing her story, I was honest with her. I said, I've had no symptoms, so I don't feel that I have anything to contribute to this conversation. But actually saying that out loud has been incredibly helpful, because I then spoke to my own medical practitioner who said, you need to be aware 25% of women have extremely severe symptoms. About 50% of women have some symptoms, and you may very well be in the 25% of women who have no symptoms. But she said, just be aware that because you don't have any symptoms, that isn't to say that there aren't certain changes taking place in your body with relation to your heart. And something that you really need to think about is that HRT isn't just for those who are suffering from hot flushes, for example. So Sally, you've made a real difference already, because I've gone and had that consultation and I'm now pursuing my own issues. The second thing is that by sharing your story, I have found that in the last few weeks, I've had more open conversations with colleagues, women who are in their 50s, and I've helped a couple of them perhaps sit back and think a little bit like your realization. Maybe they're not losing their minds. Maybe they should give the menopause some consideration as a reason why they are struggling, particularly with the brain fog issue. I've also heard, because I've been far more open on this subject, from another few colleagues. I'm connected to so many people. I have loads of conversations all the time. And I've heard some real horror stories about people who said, I left my job because I thought I was losing my mind. And others who've talked about people who have left their company, and following up with them a couple of years later, it turned out to be similar to yourself, Sally. They just felt they couldn't cope anymore. So we're losing incredible women from the workforce because actually they're going through this. So I think there's something here that unites all of us. Whether or not you have symptoms doesn't matter. We're all in this together, actually. And that's my male colleagues who don't want to lose their fantastic female colleagues, as well as those going through it. What I'm going to do, because I like to understand my audience a little bit, is that Gemma's now going to put up a poll, because I want to talk about behaviour change and cultural change in organisations, and I want to hear whether or not your organisations have got a menopause policy. So Gemma's put the poll up now, so if you could just have a quick click, and then she's going to tell us what the results are.
Hi everyone, Gemma here. So the poll's in progress and we're already seeing some results. So I'll just give a couple more minutes, a couple more seconds for people to answer. Got 80% that voted already. So try and get near to the 100%.
Aim high there, Gemma. Well done.
Yeah, always aim high. But so far, just to give you a quick update, no is coming in at the top answer. Followed by no, but they are planning to. So I think
should we close the poll now, and then we can have those percentages? That'd be great.
Brilliant. So closing, and the results are, so 14% are yes, 42% no, 30% no, but they are planning to, and 40% are not sure.
Okay, all right. Okay, so you know, the 42% no, this is going to be interesting, and the 14% who've said yes, I wonder if what I'm about to say accords to your next steps, actually, because what I'm going to talk about now is what is behaviour change, because really what we want to do is perhaps get menopause on the agenda. So let's have a little look at that. With any kind of cultural change, what I need to talk about is going from things that are hidden, that are tacit assumptions that actually guide how our organisation works, all the way through to the more explicit, more visible things where we can actually see the culture operating. So there are three sort of core elements to culture. There are three ingredients in the recipe. And the first one is that it is those assumptions, those core beliefs about what our priorities are, what we should be doing. And it could well be that we've got some kind of culture around we want diversity and inclusion. Possibly what we want to start thinking about is how do we sort of get menopause, maybe one of a number of considerations we want to get on the table, because I may not have had many menopause symptoms, but I'm also a carer for my elderly father. So I have days where I perhaps haven't slept particularly well, and I've got a lot of worries, and I'm trying to balance a full working life with a whole host of medical appointments that need to be coordinated, and he needs to travel to, and all sorts of things. So there's something in there about whether or not the organisation I'm working for perhaps has an underlying consideration that people have other demands on their time and have other worries. So what we really are thinking about there is developing a supportive environment for those that are experiencing both physical and mental challenges. And I'm not sure that just saying it's about the menopause is necessarily what we want to do. I think it's a policy we should have on top of other policies. When we think about supporting nursing mothers, those with young children, people who are caring for parents, people who are caring for disabled siblings, there's all sorts of things going on. Whatever that assumption is, and an assumption is we value all of our employees. We don't assume that everybody is 100% totally dedicated to their working lives 18 hours a day. There are things in there around, you know, you work for organisations where perhaps the underlying assumption is you have no life, all you're going to do is work. And it's about thinking about getting some of that balance into the underlying assumptions of what we think about in the organisation. If we can do that, whatever those assumptions are, that's where the policy comes in, because the second part of any kind of behavioural change or cultural change is what are the sort of the norms around here, that they're captured in things like the staff handbook, the quality management system, the policies and standards that we follow and therefore that we're audited against. There are things that pop up in people's role descriptions. I think we can see these two elements of cultural change over the last few years in relation to mental health, because we've now got perhaps an underlying belief that supporting the mental health and not just physical safety at work is something that we need to attend to. Now, I mean, as a former CEO myself, I can say that 20 years ago that was not on the agenda, but it absolutely is accepted agenda now. So that has taken place. And what do we see in the policies and standards? We have mental health policies, we have HR providing training and support, and there's an awful lot of people who've become mental health first aiders, for example. Maybe there's something we want to consider about using the most recent example of cultural change, which I think is the mental health awareness, and thinking, well, what was the pattern that's worked there, and whether or not, for example, we would want to have menopause advisors, people who are prepared to perhaps be trained up to a sort of super user level, who have a lot of information and can signpost concerned colleagues to available information, for example, something that the company does for its staff, and that's whether they're male or female, because their male colleagues supporting their wives, their daughters and their sisters through it are just as interested in some of that information. So that's how the culture becomes normalized, is because we put it into all of our support structures. So that includes training courses, but it includes appointing people to specific roles. It's all about putting some of the resources in place that actually enable people to get this cultural shift happening. The third part is the very visible piece, where we actually see people who are effectively, it's in the physical environment we've made changes. So we might see certain roles appearing in the organisation structure, we might see things appearing on meeting agendas, but also we see role modelling and its corollary, which is storytelling, because when people are behaving in a certain way and we see that, we often tell stories about it, because we notice that there's been a shift, and we start to tell stories, which also encourages more people to role model. So there's certainly a virtuous circle that goes on here at this very visible level. So this is the application of all the things that we've put in the policies and standards, and those policies and standards come off the back of our core beliefs about the importance of recognising, addressing and supporting those going through menopause. So we want to put all of these pieces together effectively. And whilst they are all interconnected, it is very interesting that if you want as an organisation to fail at cultural change, what you do is you end up with things on the right hand side that people are doing, but they're not actually embedded in how people think and what's important and what the priorities are in the organisation. We've been through this a lot with sort of flexible collaborative working, because you probably know the organisations that did things like put in a ping pong table or put in some informal seating with whiteboards around and going, oh, we're very agile here, we're very collaborative, but nothing actually shifted underneath. And so the demands on people to sort of just keep delivering and doing all of the detailed planning up front in very waterfall ways, none of that changed. But we had sitting on that on that teetering pile of demand was, oh, we've got a ping pong table. So you know how cultural change can go wrong is because people jump to the right hand side and sort of say, oh, well, they make a big noise. But if you really want cultural change to happen, then we have to dig into what do we think are the sort of accepted, those core beliefs are sort of, what do we think are the accepted priorities? What do we want people thinking, feeling and believing around here that would make a difference? And I would argue that the first thing is that we recognise that menopause can have a detrimental impact on performance. We recognise that it happens, it's not imaginary. We recognise that it is a temporary but a still significant health crisis, and that we have therefore supportive measures in place. So I think getting it on the agenda is really what we're talking about with the core beliefs, and that then is when you put the policy in place. It's about shifting what people think is important and what they're prepared to sort of do. Now, if we manage that, okay, and we sort of start really what I'm talking about here is changing the thinking, If I can change the thinking, then what I then do is I need to think about how do I lead people through a life cycle of behavioural change. And there's a few things I want us to be thinking about here. So wherever we are now with our organisation, some of the things that I've just highlighted are things that we perhaps want to go forward on, that we want to, this is the behaviour that we would like to see, that we acknowledge menopause, there's greater understanding within our organisation of potentially what symptoms might be, and what kind of support is the most helpful at work. So we go from where we are now, and you use the poll as a starting point to do that baselining, but obviously there's more you can do to think about what that future state might be. So you have to go back to this earlier slide. You have to get an understanding of what you want that culture to be, that future state. It's not fixed in stone, because I think what we'll find is this is very much emergent change. And if you go back to those people working in the psychologists who perhaps helped get mental health awareness into the culture of organisations, they would sort of argue that what their first future state was just to raise some awareness. And many of them never dreamed that they get as far as sort of having mental health first aid courses and having mental health support as a sort of recognised responsibility within organisations, and that they wouldn't have quiet, safe spaces for people at work. That certainly wasn't on the agenda a few years ago, but their future state has evolved and they've become more ambitious over time. So I'm just sort of saying, whenever you're trying to do cultural change, don't think that it's all going, that future state has to be perfect to begin with. It's something that can evolve. It's a very agile thing. It's very emergent. But whatever we're doing, we want to go from where we are now to our future state. And that means we have to lead ourselves and others on a journey through behaviour change. And the first thing we have to do is we have to get people interested. Now, interest means that, first of all, we have to get people aware. And Sally's doing a fantastic job by sharing her story. And it isn't, I don't think, very easy to get started on this. But I'm certainly sharing her story, and I'm talking to other people, and I'm asking them, and I'm then sharing other people's stories, and particularly of the impact. So I'm getting people, I'm starting on that journey of perhaps getting people aware that this is a thing, and that this is something we probably should take notice of, and that because an awful lot of women who've very quietly and very politely gone through hell, but not mentioned it because they're copers, and then they just put one foot in front of the other every day, just because that's been going on for decades, it doesn't mean to say that it wasn't a thing, and it wasn't a thing that we probably need to take notice of. So I think there's a lot we can do in sort of raising the flag and going, hey, you know, this is something that perhaps could have some relevance for us. And I'm very commercial at the heart of things, and I think, well, why is this of interest? If I have to make a business case for why anybody should listen to me on this subject right now, I can make the point the Great Resignation or the Great Reset has been fantastic for this. Because I could say, we don't really want Sally leaving ILX, do we? I mean, to actually recruit somebody of her experience, what that's going to do to the organisation in terms of its performance, there is going to be a big performance dip. Why is there a big performance dip? Because we lose all of Sally's connections, we lose all of her experience and her knowledge, we lose her corporate history. We bring somebody else in. Well, first of all, we've had to go through that entire talent acquisition process, and that is not cheap. And then we've got to get that person up to speed. So we could be talking months where the company loses ground. Do you really want to be doing that? And do you really want to do that? Let's take 1% of our workforce, and that's that female population, that 1% who perhaps are affected by this. That's a huge talent acquisition cost. So I can talk very persuasively in figures about why you should be interested in this. So I can even get a CFO on my side, given, you know, enough of a sort of following wind. I'll talk them through it. So I think That's what I mean by interest, is that we actually have to sort of start putting people, being aware that actually this is relevant to the numbers in our company. This isn't just a nice touchy-feely. Touchy-feely is not bad, but it doesn't get everybody on side. And we're going to talk in a moment about how, you know, if we want to sustain change, we have to dig into it in quite a high number of people. If I get people interested, I then need to extend that conversation that I've just started with, the business case, and get them feeling that there are many benefits. Whenever it comes to changing our behaviour, we are relying on a particular type of motivation, intrinsic motivation. It's the internal fire that we have. That intrinsic motivation is pretty much made up of three things. The first is that we think that what we're talking about is meaningful, valuable, beneficial, advantageous, and improvement. Any positive words you want to think of right now. You know what it's like. If you've got something that you're interested in and you think, oh, this could be good for me, this would be helpful, I like this, I think this is relevant. When you've got those things in your inbox, you address them, don't you? There's other stuff in your inbox you think, oh, I don't want to get in touch with it. Oh, I think this is a waste of time. I can't be bothered. You know, that's the opposite of intrinsic motivation, because that's the stuff that we procrastinate on. We're talking here about motivation with positivity. So what we want to do is get people feeling this is something good for me. What's in it for me? So we want to be using that business case to get some people excited about the fact that this could save us some costs and this could maintain our current level of productivity rather than taking a big hit on productivity. Other people, we can talk to them about the values, about how we don't want people to feel awful at work, and that we don't want people to feel marginalised or worried that they're losing their minds. And there's everything in between those two ends of the spectrum. But all of that is talking about the positivity, that making people feel that this is very, very relevant to them. Because intrinsic motivation starts with those benefits and value. And then what we want to give people is the opportunity to go as far as they want to. Give them some self-choice on things that they can support with. That's the sort of thing that's happened with mental health in organisations, because some people have used that self-choice, that autonomy, and gone, volunteer, I want to be a mental health first aider. And other people have gone, no, that's not for me, I don't want to get involved. So autonomy, self-choice, and people playing to their strengths when they make those choices, all of that wraps into that internal fire, that internal motivation that we're looking for. Because with any behaviour change, any way in which we're asking people to do things differently, at the end of the day, it's intrinsic motivation that's so important, because it is the argument in here, yeah, okay then, I'll give this a go, or oh, I'm ignoring that. That's what happens. You could always try extrinsic, external motivators. I can reward you or punish you, but that means an awful lot of micromanagement, and that's very difficult to get anybody from the start to the end of this cycle through. So what we're looking for is inner fire, and you now know what the ingredients of that inner fire is. So advertising the benefits, the value, the relevance of something, very important. One of the things I'm afraid about positivity is that it sometimes dips when there's lots of other calls on our time and we start to realise that we've got other things to worry about, or that we feel that the argument's going nowhere or other people don't support us. We can dip in positivity, and that's when we have to dig into that resilience. Resilience is that persistence, that determination to keep going despite whatever else is being said around us. So I think with this shift, I think what Sally's talking about, when I look at it, I think we're into the next few years of this being a conversation, and I know Sally recognises that. This is not something that will get addressed overnight. So we are talking about dipping into our resilience, I think, because we will have to keep the conversation live over an extended period of time. If I can, keep that positivity going, then that's the gateway to this. The key thing for any kind of change is participation, getting people to have a bit of a go and change their own way of doing things from me. I mean, I've been through this cycle because of Sally. Sally made me aware. She got my interest. I started to think, oh, this is quite relevant. Oh, it's quite, I'd never really thought about all of that before. And then I started to think about why does this matter? And I started to think about organizational health. My job is to transform organizations. I'm building the capability for change in lots of different big brands around the world. And I started to think, yeah, there's fantastic women I'm working with, and I don't want to lose them from the workforce. So I started to have a real, this matters to me, you know. So I had that positivity. And now I'm participating because I'm now part. Sally, no idea that she's triggered me off as a network of change agent, Sally, because you triggered me off, and now I'm cascading that down to lots of other people in my network to take the message forward. So I'm knee deep in that participation bit. I'm having a go. And of course, nobody ever gets to the having a go bit unless you've gone through, first of all, the interest, then the positivity. And it's that gets you into the having a go bit. So I think for many of us in our organisations, we are at that interest stroke positivity step, and we're not seeing much difference at the moment. But let's keep pushing on. Let's find things for people to do. And of course, as with anything, participation also can sometimes dip because of the pressures we're all under. And we have to sort of dig in and go, no, I'm going to keep going. I mean, I have to be honest, this morning, one of the things I was thinking about was I have 101 things on my diary today, and because I'm taking an hour and a half out for this today, that's an hour and a half I need to put into my diary tomorrow morning, before I'm now hosting 2 lunches this weekend for all sorts of reasons, and I'm about to probably foster another homeless dog. So I have the foster meeting tomorrow as well, and I'm thinking, where am I supposed to find all the time for this? But of course, this is an important subject, and therefore carving out 90 minutes today and about an hour last night to go through the slides. Now, I did it at about 10 o'clock last night, but hey, it's because it's important. And that's the classic resilience, isn't it? I'm digging deep and reshuffling my diary to make time for this, like you all have. You've joined me on this today. So I think that's an example of that resilience. We dip into that, and I'm just pointing it out that I didn't want to create the feeling that any kind of behavioural change is a nice, straight, simple life cycle through interest, positivity, participation, and then enjoyment. Enjoyment is when we get to realising the benefits and we start to see around us that actually it's okay to say, I'm having a menopausal morning and I need a little bit more support, please. Or just looking at somebody as Sally's about to give a presentation, and a colleague realising that maybe a nice glass of cold water would be something really sensible to give her right now. You know, it's that kind of building up that awareness. There's lots and lots of benefits if we can get this on the agenda of actually being a more supportive group of people at work to each other. So I absolutely think that's right. Now, I don't want to put anybody off, but I do want to also be honest about behaviour change, in that all sounds great, but we need to be aware that there are people, and I'm going to put Sally in the innovators, early adopters column, because she started the ball rolling and she's off and running, and she's pulling me up on that and sort of making things go right. But then what we have in any kind of change is you have those people who are innovators and early adopters. That means those are people that are sort of, maybe they become aware of something earlier than others. They certainly view change as, oh, this is something we can do. This is something that we can really make a difference on. This is absolutely right. Definitely want to be involved in this. And they are early volunteers. And actually, the DNA of somebody who's in the innovators, early adopters sort of group is, in their heart, what they feel is that change is a progression. Change is a good thing. Change is something we should be moving towards. So they're more likely to get on board with that. The early majority are a group who, they're in favour of continuous improvement. They're in favour of change. But, you know, if you had to sort of characterise, they point and go, let's see how it works out for Sally first. Let's just see if she keeps her job. Let's just see if her board don't try to sort of edge her out. I'll just hang back and just see what happens to Sally first before I sort of stick my head over the parapet on this issue. Nothing wrong with that. That's what early majority do. They would rather others go first, and they will take the experience of the early adopters, the innovators and early adopters, and they will sort of think through the practicalities of how it will work for them. And then finally, we mustn't forget that in any organisation, there'll be people who they are the late majority and the laggards. This is some work from a psychologist called Rogers in the 1950s and 1960s. That's why it's the word laggards, because it's not the most accessible terminology in the world. But in their heart, the DNA there is we're fine as we are. And I don't think a global pandemic's the time to be talking about this, Sally. I don't think our customers will want us talking about this. This sounds a bit embarrassing. I really don't think we should be talking about this. And that's what you'll hear from the sort of the late majority and laggards. And you can see there that they have a much longer sort of curve. It's going to take them, in fact, the amount of time we're going to have to spend generating their interest and positivity is going to be much, much greater than in the early adopters. And also, it's worth bearing in mind that their need for resilience, if you like, their need to be bolstered and to maybe to help them keep going is going to be greater. So you can use this to have a think about who you are, but you can also use this to have a think about who some of your colleagues are and how this might work for you. But there's the one thing I would say is this, that if you are the innovator early adopter, have a go, get on board. The only way change really happens is because of those early examples from people like Sally and possibly you, because you're on this webinar. It's your early examples, it's your experiences, it's your piloting and prototyping of things that actually get the early majority on board. And if you think of any normal distribution curve, that will take you to about 50%. What gets the late majority on board is people looking, going, am I missing out? Ooh, am I out of step? So change always starts with the early adopters. And this is why I was so pleased to be part of this webinar. I'm going to shut up now because I think there's probably lots of questions and I expect a lot of them are for Sally. So I'll keep my voice down, but you have a chat with Sally, and thanks for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Mel. I've learned so much, and I just can't wait to get back to ILX and put some of all of this into practice. So thank you. So Gemma, have we got any questions that have come through yet?
Not at the minute, but anyone who wants to ask a question, don't be shy. It's a really fascinating topic and subject, and also Sally, thanks so much for sharing your story as well, because it is really good to hear personal experience, because then it makes it more relatable as well for people.
I've got a question. I hope Sally doesn't mind me asking, but one of the things that I am interested in because of behaviour change is that view from the laggards. I'm not sure we want to be addressing this. It makes me look a bit weak if I bring this subject up. What's been the experience when you've started having this conversation amongst your colleagues, your peer group of senior leaders within ILX, for example, and also perhaps your team members? Can you give us a little bit of your experience of that?
Yeah, so a couple of examples. So when I wrote a blog about this probably a couple of months ago, and one of my team, male, called me. Literally, he'd read it and he called me and said, Sally, I'm just so proud of you. And he said, I know that takes a huge amount of strength to share your story. And he said, I hadn't realized all of these things that you're going through. It never showed, and just incredibly proud of you. And actually, that really did touch me. And the fact that it was a male that was the first person that actually reached out to me. Likewise, Russell, my MD, has been incredibly supportive. I still struggle a little bit, I have to be honest, in being completely open. I still feel a little bit shy and a little bit sort of uncomfortable, because I don't know if you've heard of that expression, don't air your dirty laundry in public. Yeah. Well, you know, I was brought up not to share stuff like this, personal stuff like this in the workplace. It was just a generational thing. So I never have really. I've sort of kept my personal life to my, you know, to my personal life. So it's been a big step for me, but I do feel I feel almost liberated that I have been open about it. Because I just do see this the beginning of my journey of trying to make a change, not only for myself but for others as well.
That's really interesting. That I think, as you said, you are still a little hesitant, but hopefully by hearing today how you as an early adopter are leading the charge, and the fact is that you're showing, I think, a great deal of bravery, because you've brought up a difficult subject, and yet you're sharing it very openly. But we never get anywhere unless we have the early adopters. Unless people start this particular ball rolling, they might not recognise that this is the life cycle model that they're moving through. But unless we have people like you who are starting to raise the flag, as I said, I've already got, you know, data that shows that you have made a difference, because you've made a difference to my own health, because it's raised, you know, it enabled me to have a conversation with my own medical practitioner, who therefore raised a flag. Just because you haven't had symptoms, don't think there isn't things you shouldn't be doing. That was number one. Number two, it enabled me to have some very interesting conversations with people. And I know from those conversations that I've provided reassurance to a number of women who've actually, when I've held up a mirror and said what they're going through, they've had exactly that moment you had with your own girlfriends, where you said, oh, it's the menopause. Oh, it's not me. It's a medical condition. I get it now. And by having that, just think how they feel incredibly empowered with that information, because I think this is the other thing. Information is power. When you've got the information, you can then look at it. When I do a lot of my neuroscience work in behavioural change, one of the things that I often talk about is that there's a reframing that has to happen if you want to dig into resilience. We've got resilience up here on the model, so let's look at it. One of the resilience techniques is that if I say to myself, I feel overwhelmed, when I say, oh, I feel overwhelmed, I means I bring it inside of myself. And that means it becomes my problem. And that means the dreaded negative voice. Oh, you're having a problem because you're so stupid, you were being lazy, you could have put more effort in. And suddenly it's all this negative feeling. And I mean, I feel overwhelmed, I feel even more overwhelmed now. If instead, though, I reframe the situation and I reframe it as, this is overwhelming, whatever this is, when something is, this is overwhelming, it's amazing. Language has such an impact on our brain responses. This is, suddenly I'm starting to look at this thing and go, how can I get round it? How can I get over it or under it? Suddenly it's out of me, it's become something quite objective, and then I can bring all my sort of analytical skills and my problem solving skills to bear on it. And why aren't I doing that when I go, I'm feeling overwhelmed? It's because I've got an internal narrative which is all about blame, and it's I'm wrong and it's totally my problem. Whereas when you go, this is, it's a very simple cognitive behavioural therapy technique for reframing. And just that short change of language means that, you know, suddenly I'm looking at this in a more objective way. And because it's objective, I can invite other people in to help me solve it. I wouldn't do that when I'm thinking this is overwhelming. So this is why you sharing your story has such a big impact on people, because instead of it being that internal narrative, I'm losing my mind, now it's this is a medical condition I'll need to address. And that is why you're having such a big impact on people's lives. And I think just calling that out, maybe that is kind of helpful.
Oh, thank you.
Right, just Gemma here again. We've had some questions in, so thank you. So first one from Laura. Thank you for a great session. I work in NHS Scotland, and I understand, a national policy is being developed. What steps would you recommend we take first to adopt? Also, we have recently set up a system-wide menopause group. So that was the first one. So what steps would you recommend?
Okay, well, I'm gonna take that from this perspective, and I would say that if you go back to, if you're going to take the lead in any kind of change, the first thing you need to do is go back to this piece and go right the way back to here and start to socialize and start to workshop. Well, what do we mean by, you know, a supportive environment? What exactly is the scope of the change that we want to put on the table? So I think, because then whatever that scope of change is, you can then bed it down into your own policies and standards, and then you can create that physical, visible application of it. But you can't do any of that unless you have this conversation first. I'm sure Sally's got her own sort of, you know, she can put a lot more colour around that, but that's the first thing. Sally, from your experience at ILX, what have you put on the table that you're saying, you know, how do we change the beliefs around here? Have you put a policy in place, or what is it that you're doing?
So we're currently looking at putting a policy in place. So we're really at the very beginning of that journey. This conversation, or this all opened up as part of a diversity, equality, and inclusion group. This conversation started, and so whilst we're right at the beginning of the journey, we have got some early adopters that really do want to sort of drive that forward, get a policy in place, and start to sort of inform, you know, and educate the employees within ILX. And then I think, as you said, the rest will follow, and we will have people that will want to be on that journey and change, and there'll be those that will probably lag behind. But yeah, we are very much at the early stages on that journey.
Excellent, but yeah, but you're having that step. What was the other question then, Gemma?
So we've had a couple more as well, but the next one, so again, thank you for sharing your story, Sally. Would Sally or Melanie feel able to recommend an organisation or group who could share a great menopause policy? We look to provide a range of information, guidance and support across all areas of health and well-being within our staff resources. So what sites, organisations and opportunities would the presenters recommend?
There was an article in the Financial Times recently, and I think they quoted the Greggs policy, which I had a quick look at and thought, well, that's a pretty good step in the right direction. Greggs Bakery has definitely done some work in this area.
And Channel 4 as well have got a great policy document, and I'm more than happy to share that, because actually that's the one that we're looking at here at ILX. It's one that can be easily sort of tailored to your organisation. So I think it was Sally that asked that question. I'll grab your email address, Sally, and I'll send that over to you.
And if anybody on the call, actually 14% of you said that you did have a policy in your organisation. So if anybody wants to put in the chat which organisation has a policy, I'm sure we can find it on your public websites, but it will be great to know those brands that are already supporting this issue.
But definitely. And actually, Sally had a follow-up question as well. Any tips to encourage male senior leaders into the Innovators Early Adopters Group for women's health and menopause awareness, adjustments and support? So that was from Sally as well.
I think when you're trying to get somebody, so if we just go through the life cycle model, when we've got to get somebody into the interest and positivity bit, relevance is the key word that I would address here. So with a male colleague, I think there are two areas of relevance. Relevance, potentially, it depends on their age and whether or not they have a partner who may be going through this, or maybe they have, maybe they're having a realization that it's actually their mum, or maybe, again, age-wise, it could be their sister that's going through it, or a close friend. Alternatively, they don't see this as relevant to them in terms of an experience. So that's why I brought up the subject of relevance through the idea of the business case and the detrimental impact not addressing this can have on business performance. So you have to think about why might they want to come to the table from a personal experience, an empathy point of view, or from a business performance point of view. And you can make, therefore, a relevant argument to either of those.
I read this wonderful story about this gentleman that was attending an information session on the menopause at Channel 4, and he couldn't wait to rush home that evening to inform his wife exactly what she was going through, because she hadn't joined up the dots, and it was him through that session that he attended on menopause at Channel 4, he was able to go home to his wife and tell her, look, darling, this is what's happening to you. It's okay. Let's go and get some support. I just thought that was just a wonderful story. I can imagine him rushing home, desperate to tell her.
Oh, I love that. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, that's lovely. And actually, so just Jay wanted to say massive public thank you to you, Sally, for paving the way for those of us following behind and making the menopause something we can talk about. So yeah, thank you. And also thank you from me as well on that one.
Oh, thank you
Absolutely.
both. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been brilliant. Thanks for inviting me. It's been a great chat.
No, thank you, Melanie.
Sabina's has just said that Wilco's already have a policy, and they also have a WhatsApp group and monthly meetings to share experiences, hints, and tips. So that's kind of Wilco's are kind of going forward on that one. And Sabina also said, I present at our department meetings, giving information relating to menopause.
Great.
But that's all. But look, thank yous and questions. That's the only questions I've got so far.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Well, we've come to the end. We're going to be good citizens, aren't we? And try and finish 5-2 so that people who've got their next meeting on the hour can get off to the bathroom. Well, that's certainly always my preference. So there we go.
Well, thank you everybody for listening. I hope you've got a lot out of today's session. I certainly have. I hope that it has prompted you to go back into the workforce and do something different and try and drive that change towards women that are going through these symptoms as a cause of the menopause. And if you are looking to implement any change within your organization, whether it's related to the menopause or not, and you're looking for some support, please do feel that you can reach out to us. Our contact details are there, and we'd be more than happy to help you. And yeah, I wish you all a good day, and thank you once again for attending. Melanie, thank you. It has been a pleasure, an absolute pleasure. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.